Hi, I'm Tony Van Veen, CEO at Discmakers. Today I want to talk to you about the inexact science of how many minutes of music fit onto a vinyl record. This is a topic that has tripped up plenty of artists trying to put their album on vinyl. So pay attention. I'll be discussing how much music on your LP or single will help it sound its best, what the maximum number of minutes is, what the main factors are in determining how many minutes of music you can have on each side of your record, some of the things that mastering engineers do to squeeze a bit more time onto that record, and the downside of squeezing the maximum amount of music onto a record. So let's start by talking about how much time is optimal per side of a record and what the recommended max is. Of course, the maximum time is driven by physics. It's how many grooves can you squeeze into that space that you have on a 12-inch or a 7-inch record. And yes, I know it's technically only one long groove, but you get the gist, right? It's about how close you can get that groove to run next to the groove next to it. Now, if you're interested in vinyl, you want your record to sound amazing. Right? So for a 12-inch record at 33 1/3 RPM, the optimal length per side of the record is 18 to 20 minutes of music, roughly enough for 5 or 6 3-minute songs on each side. If your songs are longer than 3 minutes, you can put less songs on your record. The recommended maximum program length per side is 22 minutes. So that would mean your album would be about 44 minutes long for both sides. If your 12-inch spins at 45 RPM, a maxi single, the optimal time for a great sounding record is 12 minutes per side, and the max is 15. Now, real quick, for 7-inch 45s, your optimal length per side is 3 to 4 minutes, and the max is 4.5. And at 33 1/3, which is kind of a niche thing that is occasionally done for EPs, popular in the punk scene particularly, where they can include 2 or 3 short songs per side, the optimal length is 5 minutes per side and the max is 6. So, is the maximum length I just mentioned really the maximum? I hear from musicians from time to time, oh, I own an LP that's 25 minutes per side. And that is true. It is possible to cut longer sides than the 22-minute max that we recommend for an album, but it will impact your audio. So, what are the factors that impact how long a vinyl program can be? Perhaps the biggest one is bass. The more bass, the more low frequency there is on the record, the more the grooves need to modulate. You know, the more extreme the jiggles in the groove. Look at this small cross-section of a record taken with a microscope. You see the grooves, and you see the spaces in between the grooves called the groove separation or the land. In the image I show you, you can clearly see a groove section that has high modulation. More modulation means you need more spacing between your grooves. Look at how much space the high modulation groove takes up compared to the low modulation groove next to it. So, a lot of bass means more groove modulation, which means it takes up more space on the album, which means a shorter music program. Or, if the program is too long, the mastering engineer will need to reduce the bass during mastering, which leads to less modulation of the groove. One thing to watch out for when mastering is that the grooves can't be too close together. If you get so close that the grooves touch, or sometimes even slightly cross over into each other, which is called a crossover, the stylus will want to skip from one groove to the next, which obviously leads to a defective record, which is why the mastering engineer pays such close attention to groove spacing when planning to cut your lacquer. Another issue that determines program length is the number of songs. As we all know, between songs on an LP, there's a short crossover. What in the industry is called a VTM, a visual track marker. That's where the groove gets a little wider so that you can drop your stylus on track 3 instead of at the start of the record. Because the groove is wider at the crossover, it takes up the equivalent of about 20 seconds of music, even though the silence may only be 3 or 4 seconds. Therefore, the more songs you have on a side, the more crossovers that can add up to the equivalent of a couple of extra minutes of music that have to be taken into account when mastering a record. High frequencies or treble can also be problematic. It's an interesting phenomenon, actually, that as your groove gets closer to the center of the record, high frequencies, horns, cymbals, the letter S, can get slightly distorted. The data is all there in the groove, but there's something about the way the stylus tracks the groove that makes those high frequencies prone to distortion closer to the center of the record than on the outside of the record, which is why mastering engineers take into consideration where on an album a song is when they listen to your music before cutting a lacquer. They prefer that songs with a lot of high frequencies be early on the side of the record that they're going to cut, close to the outside, rather than later, close to the inside. Or else, they need to roll off some high frequencies on those songs or implement a de-esser, which limits the sibilance from those high frequencies. Okay, I know this stuff can get really geeky. I hope this wasn't too complicated. So to answer the question, can we cut an album side longer than 22 minutes? Yes, it is physically possible, but we don't like doing it because we have to make all these compromises that I just mentioned to the sound of the LP. They will need to roll off the bass to limit modulation in the groove. In extreme cases, they will change the bass to mono so that the walls of the groove, instead of going like this, go more like this, so that the groove itself doesn't bump the stylus out. And finally, the engineer will need to cut a shallower groove to fit more grooves into the available space. You can see here on the same cross section of an album side that for a regular depth cut where there are, in this example, 7 grooves in the space, when the lacquer is cut shallower, you can squeeze an extra groove into the same space. That means more time to play. The shallower groove by itself doesn't really impact the sound of the record. The sound is impacted more by the EQ that the engineer needs to do to limit the groove modulation. However, a shallower groove does come with a slight risk that the record could skip more easily over time. By now, I hope that you figured out that mastering for vinyl is not just a quick press the button and go process. A lot of prep goes into each album before the groove gets cut. The engineer listens to the program, checks the timing, the number of tracks, plans the groove spacing, makes some EQ adjustments as needed so it all fits on the record and will sound good. And, as I said, that's all done before the cutter stylus is even dropped onto that virgin lacquer. The issue with extra long programs is that this prep and this cutting process takes much longer than just the extra 2 or 3 or 4 minutes of playing time per side. The engineer may need to listen to the music multiple times before he or she plans how to cut the lacquer. It also means that cross-cuts are more likely as the grooves get closer, which leads to more frequent recuts. Which is why mastering a program that is longer than 22 minutes is more expensive than a program that is under 22 minutes. Why did I spend all this time talking about longer programs on vinyl? Because in today's streaming world, most albums are way longer than 44 minutes. Heck, even our old friend the CD could hold over 70 minutes of music. And artists are frequently disappointed when they figure out that their album on vinyl can only be 44 minutes long. So what should you do if you have a long album program and want to put it on vinyl? Well, the right thing to do is to release a double LP. Yes, it doubles your vinyl cost pretty much. But man, fans love themselves a double LP. The extra weight, the fancy gatefold jackets, they're amazing. The budget option is to take a few songs off your album to get your program down to no more than 22 minutes a side. Not ideal for a vinyl album, which is really a premium product for your fans, but many an artist has done so that they can have vinyl out without breaking the bank. So let me close with this. All these limitations, these adjustments that have to be done, these limitations with vinyl that I talked about, They're not a bug. They're a feature. They are what makes a vinyl record special, the craft of it. It's so unique, and all these unique features, these changes that happen to the sound, leads to a sound coming out of your speakers that is so perfect. You may never want to listen to Spotify again. So go ahead. Press that record. You won't regret it. I promise.